Hello everybody, welcome to a Albums of the Month video. We haven't done this since March last year, so this has been quite a while, but yeah, what I'm going to do on these videos is I'll go into brief discussion about each album that I haven't done a proper video on and put it into this little compilation. So it's basically a list of albums I haven't had time to fully focus on, so I've listened to these albums, wrote some notes, and just putting it into this video. So I'm going to be going through it in the same order I have with the other ones. So this starts off with the worst albums, followed by the alright albums, to the best albums of the month. So that's pretty much it, and so let's get started with the worst. Yeah, we got the second album by South of Salem, titled Death of the Party. This is a band that plays with the traditional hard rock mixture with some classic metal in a modern setting. It kind of sounds a bit like a mouthful, but it's basically a mixture of the heavier side of modern hard rock and some of the earlier stuff from like the 90s to a mix of that kind of classic glam metal to just the heavy metal we had in the around the 80s. I like the idea that this band's been going for. The sound definitely has an audience, but this album just doesn't really do any justice. However, it plays into some of the more boring sounds possible, like with Jet Black Eyes, with just some very weak melodies that just dampens the song, and even the verses and riffs just don't help it. There's even simple riffs in tracks like Stitch in the Wound, which just drags this album down a bit as well. Just guitars that just don't really do much. But the guitar solo in that track is definitely the highlight of this, one of the highlights of this album. Vultures is a fun start, but I like the album, it falls apart into some more weaker territory than it should. It's definitely a letdown, because some of it's definitely promising, but it's just not really a concrete album that I would consider going back into. I'm gonna have to give it a 2 out of 5. It's kind of bad. Got the new one by Dead by April, titled The Affliction. I didn't actually know this one released, so I went back and listened to it, and I gotta say, it is a pretty awful record. First of all, it just feels very overproduced and overprocessed. There's a lot of effects that doesn't even need to be used on the voice, but it happens anyway. And some of it, like the first 2 tracks, Swarm Mode and My Lie, it just leads the album off to a terrible start. It's an album that sort of feels more like they're trying to put that kind of blend of electronicore, but their idea of electronicore is just do the metalcore aspect and slap a shitload of electronic components onto the record, and it honestly just feels so weak, especially since this album's around 52 minutes. It just drags on around that point, and it just becomes such a very bland sound by the end of it. It just feels absolutely underwhelming and just boring. And what I thought would save the album is the guest features, because there's a lot of guest features on this one. It does not save the album. Like, there's some good bands. I do like Smash Into Pieces, even if I find them a little bit more generic, and Self-Deception aren't half bad either, but I just don't think anything really saves this record from how jarringly in your face it is with the electronic ideas. Like, electronic core can be heavily electronic and it can sound over the top, but I feel like bands that know how to make it work. I'll be honest, Icy Stars, New Demons had a lot of this, and I don't mind it one bit. Bands like Shikari have done with a lot of electronic stuff into their hard rock sound, and I don't think it's really a bother, to be honest. But this album is one of the worst metalcore albums I've heard in a long time. I'm surprised by it, but I'm giving this one a 1 out of 5. I'm really sorry if you like it. I just absolutely did not. We've got a new one by New Model Army, titled Unbroken. This is a band that's been blending in sort of punk with folk rock as well, just kind of giving you that little mixture. And they've been going since the 80s, so this is a band that's been going for, I'd say, around almost 50 years, or getting to that point. I'm not necessarily 100% sure when they started, but their first album definitely came out early 80s, and it's really interesting to see what they sound like in the modern setting. However, this is not really that good, to be honest. I just feel like the overall sound of this album's a bit too quiet, and I had it on like a loud sound, but it just felt a lot quieter than some of the other albums I listened to. I don't know if it's just because stuff's trying to get louder and louder, or this is just a bit too quiet, but that's not really the big issue of the album. I'd say some songs just feel underwhelming, a lot of it actually. There's some stuff that does work with the usual punk folk blend, but most of it didn't, to be honest. Language, Reload, Coming or Going, and Legend, these are definitely the highlight tracks. They definitely utilise some of the best ideas of their sound and manage to make it feel fresh. I just feel like the other tracks just do a bare bone job of it, and it's such a disappointment too, because I honestly wish if we had more tracks like these, especially Reload and Language, I would definitely dig the album more, but it is just kind of there. There's not really anything I find terrible with this record, but there's just so many tracks I just think are really underwhelmingly boring that I don't see the need to go back into this album. I'd give it a 2 out of 5, to be honest. We have the new one by German metalcore band Any Given Day, and I'm gonna be honest, I did not like this album. I don't understand what this one was going for, but to me it just feels like a more metalcore version of Five Finger Death Punch. I just find when it comes to those bouncy riffs that just kind of hit that, oh, we're heavy, but it's Five Finger Death Punch's term on the word heavy. It just honestly comes with a more metalcore variant of that band. I feel like even the Unclean sounds similar to Ivan Moody, so it's not really helping that case. And what else doesn't help? The fact that there's even some country vibes in some of the songs, like in the track Come Whatever May, the track that I kind of assumed was a Stone Sour song for a minute just because of the name, but obviously that's just confusion of having the same title. But the lyric simplicity as well is what really drives it. They're not helping themselves. It just sounds like Five Finger Death Punch. The only tracks I really enjoyed was Hate, which this one features another German metalcore band, and He's Okay, which I actually think is pretty decent, and I think their feature on this one works great. It kind of drives the album into some better ideas that the rest of the album sort of struggles to find. Other than that, this is just a poor man's Five Finger Death Punch. You could argue it's better than Five Finger Death Punch, but I don't know, this just honestly blows. This is a weak album, and I've been giving it a 1.5 out of 5. Now we're moving on to the alright albums. So everything here is pretty much 2.5 out of 5. It's not that good, or it's not that bad. It's kind of a mixture of stuff that I think could be better, but then again it could be worse. Next we have the new one by Tenside. This is a German metalcore band which I've never heard of, but this new album, Come Alive Dying, is interesting because I feel like it's got elements that are really interesting, but it plays too safe in some of the other areas that kind of drags it down a bit. I feel like the safer choruses and hooks just don't even shine as well when you have great instrumentation on tracks like Pitch and Gold and Shadow to Shrine, which have great, as I mentioned, instrumentation, but I feel like the hook's just a little bit bland. I even think they are capable of doing some good hooks though, because Impending Doom, I think, has a great feature from John Henry, the lead singer from Darkest Hour, and it makes the track one of the best on the record. I think Aim for Paradise is when the album starts to kind of dip into the weaker songwriting, because even the songs with some of these meh choruses were still intriguing to me, and some of the ideas around there, but it just kind of declines. I feel like that's the album's entire listen, it declines from that point on. The first half is definitely the stronger half, and the second is just filled with more dud tracks. Well, I'm gonna put it in the alright section actually, because it's not bad, but it's not good either. And with alright, I don't really need to give it a score because it's always 2.5 out of 5. So yeah, it's alright. Another one on the alright section we have is Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes' Dark Rainbow. So this is their 5th album, and it has got some ambitious ideas, but as a whole it's a bit underwhelming. You definitely have those influences which present, like Arctic Monkeys, to the sonic vocal aspect, like with tracks like Happier Days. It just literally slips out with the Alex Turner sort of vocal passages, especially towards the newer era of Arctic Monkeys. And then some of the riffs just remind me of a mixture of Queens of Stone Age and Royal Blood. Royal Blood definitely shows in the track Brambles. It's not much of an evolution when it just kind of pushes for the similar thing that the band's been kind of going for with the last few records. It's a formula of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but I feel like they need to kind of bring in some new ideas, because honestly Dark Rainbow is just a bit boring as a whole listen. It's got some great ideas though. I think towards the end is where the album really has its best tracks, like Queen of Hearts and Sunbright Golden Happening. These ones being a lot slower definitely gives the album different pacing and just some different ideas to play with, and I kind of like the variety there. Otherwise than that, you're just kind of going for a very similar thing throughout. But there are still some good tracks nonetheless. I think it makes for an alright listen as a whole. It's just not anything mind-boggling by Frank Carter. It's alright. We got the new one by SLIFT titled ILION. This is a psychedelic prog rock album which has a pretty fun direction to it. I like the heavier aspect. This one kind of goes for a little shift of a heavier notion, which is cool. But the biggest letdown of this record has got to be the mixing. I feel like there's a lot of reverb on the vocals, and it just kind of drowns out the guitars as well as the bass, so you can almost never hear it in some areas. It just feels it just doesn't feel right. But I know some noise rock bands do kind of have this distortion to it, but to me I just feel like this is just a bit too much, and it kind of dampens the enjoyment of some of the great tracks. I like the track ILION most of all. However, this one just is 7 minutes and 30 seconds of fun. Just goes into a cool little break with some synths to play with before building up the energy again. It's a fun album, but I'm not that crazy on it, and I think the mixing kind of dampens it a bit. I'm gonna say it's an alright album. I'm not huge on it, and it's definitely leaning more to the good or the best albums of the month, but I kind of had to put it in alright, because it's not really an album I'm going to go out of my way to listen to again. And finally, we have the best albums of the month. The albums that I think definitely have some good gems to it. Even if they're not quite as strong, they're still stuff I'd probably go back to, just because I like what they have to offer. I'm going to start this one with Upon Stone, Dead Mother Moon. This is a debut album that just drives an old school sound of death metal with a modern polish of metalcore, in which doesn't sound like a winning combo, but honestly I think it works a lot better than it sounds. I think there's some great ideas through this entire thing. I think Onyx Through the Heart is a banger of a track. It's got a great drive, got a great some great riffs and just great energy to it. They had a Misfits cover of Dig Up Her Bones, which honestly works surprisingly well, especially since I was not expecting that for a death metalcore sort of old school sound to work with. And yeah, I honestly like how some of the songs even have a drive of old In Flames, not the modern In Flames, which I do like, but I know a lot of people aren't quite big on, but kind of that classic melodic sort of death metal sound they had going for them. It's a good album. Honestly, I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. I think for what it adds, and I think for a debut, it's a pretty strong start to this discography. It's got some great ideas. Just a fun album, I'd say. Next we have the new one by The Smile titled Wall of Eyes. If you haven't heard of The Smile, this is the sort of spin-off from Radiohead, which features Tom York, the lead singer of Radiohead, also as the lead singer, and Johnny Greenwood, who helps with guitar, which he also did with Radiohead. So I find it's interesting that they kind of branched to doing this little side project. I don't know exactly the context. Maybe they just wanted to kind of try this project just to do some new ideas out. But to me, this album definitely gives more of that Radiohead sound off. Matter of fact, it kind of resembles a moon-shaped pool. The latest Radiohead album is kind of the vibe I get with this new record, and I do like it, honestly. I think Wall of Ice has got some good ideas, but as a whole, I just don't think the album necessarily is as intriguing to me, in all honesty. Like, it's definitely got some fun songs. I feel like the album really picks up around Teleharmonic, which I think Wall of Ice just isn't that strong of a track. It's kind of a whatever track in my opinion, but Teleharmonic, Read the Room and Under Our Pillows, it's like a 3 for 3 just filled with bangers. I love the instrumentation, I love the mood that they create with these tracks, and I think the overall aesthetic, especially with the tracks like Read the Room, is just great. The album isn't necessarily my cup of tea, because I personally find the second half a little bit underwhelming compared to the first half, but there's still some good tracks, like Bending Hectic. I think kind of the build-up on this one is pretty nice to hear, and I think You Know Me's kind of a nice ending, but as a whole, I think this is an album that I would just consider good. I don't think it's as crazy good, I don't think it's as amazing as people are making out to be. It's not an album of the year contender for sure, but I think it's still a decent project for what it offers. There's some good ideas, and as a whole, I just think the overall aesthetic is there. It just doesn't quite scratch the Radiohead itch, I guess, but it also feels like it's trying, just with some of these songs definitely feeling like classic Radiohead around that point. But yeah, I think this is a decent album, and I'll give it a 3 out of 5 just because of that. It's pretty decent. We got another debut album this month. This is a new one by NewDad titled MADRA. NewDad's bringing in the shoegaze indie pop blend with some lo-fi sounds, like with the track Where I Go. Honestly, this album has a really strong start with the track Angel, which is definitely one of my top tracks of the album. I just love the energy on this one, and I think the overall etherealness that they start to build up with the first few tracks is something I really enjoy. There's just some real fun drive into the funky Sickly Sweet, which has one of the most fun bass lines on the album. I think it's just pretty funky, not gonna lie. The album is just filled with infectious melodies, and it manages to cross between all of the genres without kind of wearing tired or just kind of feeling a bit overplayed. I feel like everything is utilized enough to the point where it isn't obvious that they are just trying to pander to one sound. They have quite a bit of variety here, and I really enjoy it. It's a fun, energetic album, and even the final track, the self-titled track Madra, is just a great way to end the album off. Yeah, I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's definitely worth the listen. Drown & Sulphur released a new album, Dark Secrets of the Soul. Yeah, I don't really mind this one as much, but I will say I think I prefer the older vocalist. I can't really nitpick the other instrumental components to this album when they've got new band members, because I haven't really been digging as much of Drown & Sulphur for that deathcore sound that they are pretty popular for. But honestly, this is just not as good with the new vocalist. I'm not saying it's a bad album though. I've actually given this one a positive score. I just think the older vocalist was a lot better, and the fact that the drummer kicked pretty much everyone out of the band just like that is kind of shitty, and they had to make a new band because of it, and I'm waiting to see what a new album from that band would be like. But honestly, the album is good. I think there's just not much that really blows you away. A lot of it is just kind of standard deathcore. It's fine. Lotus is kind of an interesting breather from the heavy deathcore sound to give you some more cleaner stuff to go for. And I'll be honest, I think even instrumentally this is probably one of the better tracks on the album. It's a good album, but it's honestly one of the weaker 3 out of 5s, I would say. One album I almost missed was Casey and How to Disappear. So Casey made a comeback, and it's a really good comeback for the band. There was a departure, and it was a bit upsetting to hear that, but I'm glad everything worked out and the band's gone back and reunited to make this what I believe their third record. This is a brilliant album to put back into the spotlight. I just enjoy the overall aesthetic. This one focuses a bit more on the kind of like the sorrow and depression sort of area, which a lot of shoegaze goes for the more emotional driven stuff, and I think when it comes to blending in melodic hardcore, they do a really good job on this record. The sound just floods this album with absolute highs. Tracks like Bite Through My Tongue just shows some of the heavy elements that just work, like the harsh uncleans, and the way it just goes from that to the softer, just the softer sound. Even some of the instrumentation on some of the uncleans is kind of calming. It's kind of a nice little juxtaposition between the two. The first two tracks though just hit like a 1-2-3 punch, just full of bangers. And the consistency throughout this whole record has been pretty high. There's not really a dull moment, and I think every track is just definitely worth a listen. This album is absolutely gorgeous. The lot of power, and it just isn't afraid to hide it. This is definitely one of the best albums of the year so far, and I could see this one definitely being a top 10 album for me. So we just got to see what the rest of the year brings. But yeah, this probably might be my album of the year. I love the Charcoal Grace record, but this one might be it just a little bit. But we'll have to see where the ranking stands at the end. But as of now, I might say this is the album of the year. I just love this one, especially with tracks like How to Disappear and Sanctimonious. Just top notch. It's everything for melodic hardcore and shoegaze done right. I'll give this one a 4.5 out of 5. I'm just not really as big on St. Peter, which I kind of don't know if it's an interlude or not, because if it's an interlude, yeah, that's fine, but I don't know. I kind of feel like this one's a little bit slower track, but it's still really good, and I think the emotional power this one has, it makes it worth the listen. Really good album. We got the second album by Dead Poet Society titled FISSION, or FISSION. I actually don't know how to pronounce that word. Honestly, it's a strong second record in their discography. I was going into this one not really know what to expect, so I was kind of just waiting to see what pulled me in, and thankfully it was after the second track. I wasn't really big on 52945. I felt this and Tipping Point were definitely the weakest tracks. I would even say My Condition is, again, kind of a weaker track as well, but I kind of enjoyed that one. So a lot of the weaker stuff actually is still pretty good on this record, but when you go into the second track, Running in Circles, it picks up immensely. I just love the refrain on this one. I love the energy, and there's just a lot of surprises that the album just throws at you from that point on. I mean, How Could I Love You and 81 Tons is just some of the best kind of blend of their sort of indie hard rock sounds. Matter of fact, a lot of this does remind me of a more lively Royal Blood, and I mean that because Royal Blood's definitely kind of dipped down into a quieter sound. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I did like the new album they did last year, but I kind of feel like this brings back some of that nostalgia for some of the earlier Royal Blood material. But yeah, honestly, while there is some silly tracks, I would even say that KOET just felt like an excuse to just swear a bit into silly fashion. I still think the track's fun. I think a lot of this album is pretty fun actually, and Black and Gold is a great way to close the album. I'm honestly going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, which is weird because I listened to one song of this record, can't remember what it was, and I was not really that interested. This was a little while back. I think this was like one of the singles, but going into it now, I definitely think this album's worth it. It's a pretty good album. We've got the new one by Lucifer V, which is the 5th album in the discography. I like the fact they've just named all their albums Lucifer 1 to 5, and they'll keep doing that in Roman numerals. I like that. It's just a nice little bit of volume, like kind of volume 5 of their entire band career. But going into the actual album, it's good. I like this one. I wasn't really as big with the At the Mortuary album track, but afterwards it just kicks into some classic ideas. I like the blends they have of they kind of like. I guess it's got a little bit of like an old school metal, but it's not really metal, it's more like a blend of that and hard rock, and I like how it sounds. It's got some pretty fun moments. 9 tracks, and I think they're pretty listenable. I think other than At the Mortuary, which it just isn't necessary for me, I think everything else stands out pretty nice. Slow Dance in the Crypt is an interesting track. I like this kind of the mood this one brings, and I think the choruses as well. They have some punchy hooks on this record. It's nothing mind-boggling, but it's a nice album. So I put it in the best albums of January. Give it a 3 out of 5. And finally, to wrap up this video, we have the final album of Static Eggs, which marks the Wayne Static legacy. In case you don't know, the lead singer Wayne Static passed away, I believe 2016, if I remember correctly, and since then the band has been releasing Project Regeneration, which is a series of albums that are chock filled with songs that never made the cut and stuff that has Wayne Static's voice on it, and Volume 2 marks the end of all the songs they have. So this is the final bit of music with Wayne Static, and I honestly think it's pretty good, despite this one being even more filler tracks, or at least just tracks never made the cut because they just didn't necessarily have what they wanted at the time. But there's a lot of good stuff, honestly, like Zombie. This one stood out. I quite like Jick Boy. Even tracks like Take Control and Dark Place are some of the highlights. There's a lot of bangers on this one, and they definitely managed to get what people really want at the same time. Yeah, I'd probably say there's, like I mentioned, there's probably going to be like 1 or 2 fillery tracks, or at least all of these were could be seen as filler tracks to those who just don't really like it. But I honestly quite enjoy this record, and especially since from Wisconsin Death Trip, this is definitely still a good sound and an album that I quite enjoy. I feel like Static X, or at least a lot of industrial metal bands, they just have something about it that they can keep releasing bangers, and there's a lot of experimentation because it's industrial. But I really enjoy what Static X have to offer here. This is a good album, and it is a good farewell completely to Wayne Static. Now, they do have a new vocalist titled Zero, which is literally the lead singer of Dope, so I'm not sure how the band's going to go from this point on. But out of the 2 industrial metal bands, Static X I think has been very consistent, and this album is good. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. Definitely worth a listen. It's close to a 4. I honestly really enjoyed this one. And that is my albums of the month. Every single album that I missed and wanted to talk about has been put here. Yeah, this has been quite... I haven't done these in a while, so it's nice to get back into doing this. I think it's fun to have a list of albums. I always prefer doing the separate video, though, because it kind of makes the album feel a bit more like it's got special attention in some way. But still, it is listed here, and I'm not going to be able to talk about every single album as a separate video, because I tried releasing as many videos at the start of January, but it just got flooded with more and more bands releasing stuff, and this January has been very busy, so I'm actually surprised by the amount of stuff to talk about. But this is over, unless I've missed something and it goes in the end of the year video. Everything from January is over, and I'm looking forward to February and onwards and seeing what bands and what potential bangers we might be getting next year. Next month, not next year. So yeah, that's video. So hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next video.